Okay, so I'm from Omaha, Nebraska, and we don't quite have spring yet. So I wanted with my presentation to bring spring. So I brought all the spring colors in, and if you haven't heard what Hanami is the Japanese phrase for describing cherry blossom viewing. And so I thought, even though it is end of March, let's bring some springtime for us, and let's talk about Hanami. So last month, with Jenny Shi had brought us functional programming for fun and profit. Let's kind of continue that dry RB journey and chat about Hanami. So these faces and people may be familiar to us. So Tim Riley, Peter Slinka, and Luca Guida are all dry RB core members, but news, they also are Hanami core members. And so this is important to realize when we start learning more about Hanami, is that it is very tied and very like what is actually brought in is a lot of relies on things from dry RB. And then the opposite. Sometimes when these contributors are working on stuff in Hanami, it may end up into dry RB. And so you'll see a lot of this ecosystem kind of goes back and forth. But let's dive in on what exactly is Hanami. And I did not time myself, so hopefully it will be okay on time. But if I do go over, I apologize. But Hanami is a modern web framework, and it's, for Ruby. So that's why we're kind of talking about it here at our Ruby meetup. And so with that kind of web framework, it's to support the development of our different web applications. We may have web services or other web resources. Maybe you have some B2B or business-to-business type services, or maybe you have web APIs. And this is what those are, it is aimed at. And what the developers and these core contributors wanted out of Hanami, especially Hanami 2.0, is that they wanted to focus on how to make something maintainable, how to make it testable, and how to scale it. Because we all are working on applications, but where our applications are right now is never where they're going to be going in the future. And so to focus even on the beginning on how to keep that scalable. And so with that, and thinking about how we're bringing in the dry RB, it's about how to create those applications that they're really a system of those components working together with clear dependencies. And as Ruby, as our dynamic language, we don't always have the most clarity on where those dependencies are coming from. So is anybody here right now working on a big Rails app? You can do your virtual hi, you do, okay. So you understand that Rails apps get big quickly, that it's easy to pile on features. It's easy to pile on the things. You're like, hey, I started out as a web application, but hey, I want people to pay for stuff. So I'm just going to add a billing onto that. No, hey, we have customers. How about we just, throw on, like a web form in there too. And then like your app gets bloated very quickly. And so that's one thing that the maintainers of Hanami were trying to help prevent is how can you make it, that system of the components, but it can scale, because big Rails apps aren't necessarily the best things that scale. And so let's dive in and see what it looks like. But just one thing to consider first. If you have been familiar with Hanami, maybe you checked it out in one of its beginning releases, like a Hanami 1.0 type release. And with Hanami 2.0, it was pretty much of a rewrite from the dry RB foundation. And so a lot of the things that were created in Hanami 1 were kind of used, but Hanami 2 is a completely different beast. And so if you looked at it at 1, you really do need to reconsider it with the 2.0 release. And so This is kind of like a basic folder structure. We just create ourselves a brand new Hanami app with a generator that they have. And so a lot of these files in that folder structure is going to be familiar. It's a rack-based web framework going on there. We got gem files, and we got a lot of the folders and structures we already kind of expect if you have been familiar with Rails or other frameworks. And so it's very approachable in that, hey, what should be underneath my app directory? Probably where most of my application code's at. What if I don't know, think it belongs in an app, maybe I'll just stick it underneath lib. That's the supporting code structure. So it's very intuitive on where the stuff probably is at. And if you need to open up a Hanami app, you kind of know as a Rails or a Ruby engineer, where should I go to? But let's dig in on how it actually does those things that it said it was kind of going for. So how does it actually help with maintainability? Well, one way is through the use of its Hanami containers, which is built on dry RP container. It uses site work for its loading. And so this is important because this is something that even Rails right now is moving to. So it's efficient and it's a thread safe code loader. Before it used to be classic for Rails, and you had to switch over to site work. I think it's version 6. And so now this is actually the top of the line code loader with Hanami. So stuff loads fast. And it helps you do that with not much effort. It's the default. Yes, it definitely could be me misspelling stuff. So yes, thanks. And what it helps with is with that efficient thread safe code loader, it does it fast and it loads in your dependencies, which helps with your boot times. But Rails may kind of eager load every single constant ever. It kind of lazy loads those. So once again, helping speed up the boot time. And then it has stuff in the Hanami container that is special in itself. So you have your app core, which you can just use that to return anything as a component. So you boot up a console, I can access any of my actual actions, think about them as my API endpoints. And the console, which as developers, you will probably live sometimes in a Rails console, is fast to boot up. I have a production app, and then I have this brand new example app I had done. My boot time for my console was the same. It didn't feel anything noticeably different. And that helps with the scaling and the combination of how it's doing that code auto-loading. But what about testability? What Hanami has is a thing called depths, which, yes, it takes a little bit to get used to. I thought it was kind of abrupt. Can we do better with our naming? But it really is a friendly dependency injection helper. And this is one of the core things that I really love after using Hanami for months. So it really helps to remove rigid dependencies because it's easy to use, it's intuitive, and it's right there. And so when dependency injection is easy to do, you are going to reach for a dependency injection. And so it's just a mix-in that you add in anytime you need to do this. And I got code examples, so don't worry about that, to just allow you to use any component as a dependency. And then when you have that depth, that helps with being able to know where are your dependencies at. And when you are using dependencies and you're using your dependency injection, that means when you test, you can actually dependency inject your mocks, anything you're using in your testing. So it makes your components easier to test. So this is just a quick example from on the Hanami site that was kind of showing, hey, I need to send a welcome email in my app, but I have to directly tie my client. I have to directly tie the thing I'm rendering. And then when I'm actually delivering that email, you can see it's hard-coded that I have my renderer and I have what I'm rendering. Then when we kind of reach instead to using depths, what we have is the depths mix-in, include depths. I just give it the email client and I use give it what I want to render. And then here, I can see that I just do email client.deliver. That depth mixin means you don't have extra adorators. You don't have other boilerplate like an initializer. So it really helps you compose those together so much simpler and then look at your readability of your code. But we all know that sometimes we don't have time in our schedule to do greenfield development. Sometimes we're not at the perfect point in a project where you come in when everything's getting spun up. And so what you can do with Hanami is you can do a little part of it, like kind of the best part of it, which is actually the Hanami API HTTP framework. So this framework is fast. So if you need to like add in some HTTP APIs, which everything is APIs nowadays, it feels like, it is an extremely lightweight Ruby way of adding it into your already existing code base. And it's an ideal mini framework. So it's a good place to start introducing some Hanami into an existing app. The maintainers themselves have been doing a lot of different kind of look at how they can keep this fast and lightweight. And this is kind of from, this is kind of from when they were doing that on the HTTP framework there. And you can see at the bottom, the big numbers, which are the badder ones here. So you want the golf score, is the Hanami is right at the top on how quick it was able to get through on those requests, or how when you have an app, you're going to start having lots of routes. So sometimes it's not about just doing stuff fast, it's about doing stuff through how many different things you have. And so you can, even though when you have lots and lots of routes going on in your application, routes kind of equal, like APIs, then you can still get through that quickly. But with all this, you might want to get your hands dirty with some of the code. There's a getting started guide on Hanami, or there's a new app that I just put out, and I'll get the GitHub info for people, is a picnic, because if we are going to go view some cherry blossoms, I think we need a picnic involved. And so we can check that out a little bit just to see what this is. I'm sorry if this is kind of small text, but we'll get, the GitHub out for people to look at. But what this kind of wanted to show is, yes, like we'll still have like a gem file and a lot of the other stuff you just need for wake-based systems, but it also will kind of show off the dependency injection. So we'll see that depth mix in here, but it also shows how easy it is to spin up a brand new API, tie in your persistence layer. So this is through ROM. And if we have more questions about persistence in the database later, I would be happy to answer that. And then just how quick it is to just set that whole like kind of stack from the front of your API all the way down to your DB. The startup is pretty darn quick. Now, the other thing they said they were pretty good at was scaling. And this is one of those that you can't really tell how good it is until you start using it for a while. But with it, they have added a component that's called slices. So if you're familiar with Rails and you're familiar with big Rails apps, you know engines. And engines have their benefits with trying to break down a monolith, but they also have their drawbacks. They're usually fairly clunky. They usually aren't easy to implement after the fact. You can kind of tear the code into there. Then the nice thing with Hanami slices is they are a built-in concern that has generators behind it, but also how they draw the boundaries is very clear, because it's building on that dry container. It's building on all that kind of dry components. They are very composable together. So yeah, it's just this built-in facility for organizing your code. So think about it like a folder structure. It allows you to kind of draw everything down the folder hierarchy, just kind of one deeper, but do it in a way that they compose together nicely. And when you actually ship out your code, you can have separate containers for each slice. So you may have in your GitHub your full-on Hanami app, but you may have slices, which then you can use in your CI/CD pipeline and have those individual containers. Which, if anybody has been doing some YAML and CI/CD lately, I can tell you it's nice when they compose together and they just work. Oop, I think I went a little fast. But this is kind of just showing off. Once again, we're kind of looking at the hierarchy. And this is actually in my customer identity access management app. We have a couple different slices. We kind of started off doing stuff for customer identity, which kind of revolved around single sign-on. But then we got OAuth thrown at us. And like that may not seem like the same thing, but customer identity is about who is the user. And then with authorization, it's who can access the user. And then authentication is, are you allowed to access the user? And so we could also have some skim going on there, which is another way of doing user management. There's a lot of acronyms. I'm sorry. We try our best with naming. Sometimes you just have only so many things you can name it. And then so you kind of see on the left is the higher view of your slices and as a full application. And then when you dive in on your slices, you can kind of see their mini apps themselves. They may have the actions, which are the endpoints. They may have their own database layer, their own database access, as well as their own like different grouping and clients that they'll have to consume and just things that are important to them. Hey, Rose, what's up?
I was just curious. So could I like visualize a slice like an individual microservice, but without that network boundary between the services, or is that taking it too extreme?
That's a little bit too extreme. So okay. It's think about it as how they usually describe it is like a mini application in a bigger application. So we keep some like shared code. So maybe we have a API or gateway provider that's used over multiple slices. So you may have that at your base app layer, and then underneath your slices, you can have them themselves using the base layer code. But you may have like your database persistent layer could be completely different with different logical databases using the same actual Postgres database in the end.
Okay, really cool. Thank you.
Yeah. Hey, Kaja, can I help you?
Yeah, I was wondering if you would also then deploy them together, or can you deploy them independently?
We deploy them out independently of each other. Since what they kind of are separate microservices, we keep them in completely separate deploys. And so like we have them out in the cloud. They're in the Kubernetes with all the K8s going on there. And so they're actually separate different containers. I love questions. Thank you so much. That means you guys are listening to me. So I'm going to talk about the CLI quick for a little bit, just because it was one of my first entrances into like Hanami dry RB that I was really just amazed at everything I could do with it. Which this is technically more dry RB over Hanami, but we've already known that that line gets a little murky. So with the dry CLI, this is your way of creating CLI commands for yourself. I love them for like having them as like individual developer tools. If you think of that as like you can compose your own CLI tooling that uses your code on the back end. So think about, hey, I'm a developer and I manually have to call off to an API. Like I need to do a IDP, identity provider, and create a SAML instance. I'm so sorry if I do so many identity based kind of examples. That's my land right now. And so if you want to do that and you want to maybe use an API client you already have coded up in your code, you could then get yourself a new command that's a CLI command that you could be like SSO create. And that on your command line that you can kind of compose those other dependencies together. And so, like, to me, that was like amazing that I could make my own command line stuff. And so they are just registered just like any object, and then you use your deps to compose those together. And so these might be things that we really liked, with your CLI that you already like rake, db, migrate. Why don't we just bring that in and we'll code up our own CLIs, which Hanami allows you to just tap into what they're doing. So all these generators and things that we're talking about that Hanami can do, they're actually just the CLI, and you can hack it yourself. And so these were some of the helpful generators. Like you can generate your app, which then it has the complete folder structure for you. When we're talking the getting started guide, that's actually where it starts at, is using that Hanami new, and then create a new app name. And so it will do that gem file as well as everything you might need for starting up a Hanami app. And then same thing with, sorry, dry today. So that's the same thing with how you actually create your slice. One of the best things is to first reach for the generator. And all these generators are actually based on the dry CLI, so then they can be hacked or modified for your own stuff. Oh God, I didn't even think about that. But yes, it's a dry day today, and I am talking dry. And so some of my favorite things, the console, like any engineer who has to deal with a production app has had to do that. Go into Heroku, boot up your Rails console, but it's in production. It's probably in a private space. It's going to take like 30 seconds. You'll boot it up. You'll go get some coffee. You'll come back. Hopefully it's loaded up. I have my Hanami console with a production app, and then I have my Hanami console with my literal app that's on my machine that I just created. They aren't that much difference between the two on the booting uptime. The slices, yeah, so we had to kind of tie out it before. Slices can be their own containers. And so that really helps when you think about separation of concerns and your logical databases. It's great for APIs. That HTTP layer is just fast. It works with its requests well. And as a developer, it's easy to create APIs. And the more I use the depths injection management and the depths injector, it just makes more sense. And I kind of miss it when I can't use it. And as well as like the dry CLI just makes it so great to make your own developer-centric tasks. But there is a couple things that Hanami could use a little bit of improvement on. So ROM, so we chatted a little bit about the persistence layer. Currently it does use ROM, which is another thing that Tim Riley is involved in, but it's not the same as Active Record. And that's a learning curve, especially coming from Active Record. There's not much front-end integration yet. So it is brilliant with APIs. It's brilliant with web services, not so great with the front end, but that's something that's coming. And with Hanami, since it's so integrated with dry RB, you kind of have to have that familiarity with that, what's going on with dry RB and that functional programming. Ugh. And so this was just showing in action like what we've done to create some of our own tooling. And so we were able to code it up with just allowing us to easily generate a whole bunch of stuff for SSO, because that was our first use case with our kind of greenfield development. And so we progressed by getting the CLI working and then kind of making it more of an automated thing. This is it in action too, kind of showing the difference in the boot time, which with keeping an app maintainable, you have to be able to get into it quickly. And so this is me just attempting to time it. So I started it and closed it right away, and started and closed it right away. And so on the left is actually using my full application. On the right is just the brand new app that I had just generated. And it's not a ton of difference time-wise in just booting up that console, which, as you know, in Rails, the more stuff you have going on, the slower your Rails console is going to boot. And then this is just kind of showing off what is the test time looking like, because running your full RSpec suite is another thing that helps with maintainability, is that you need to be able to run that full suite, and you need to be able to run it consistently, and you need to be able to run it quickly. This is one thing that these are over the 3 different slices. You can see that I'm in the seconds. The most amount of time for a full test suite run I have is 5 seconds. That's doable. Our build times are currently averaging about 5 to 6 minutes. So you talk about how you want it to be integrated on your CI/CD pipeline, you need to be able to do that. And so far, what we've been able to do in production with Hanami has worked wonderful. But we also did kind of build our use case around what we wanted to be. We needed APIs, and we wanted them fast. And so Hanami's been working well for that. Okay, I'm way over my time. So sorry. But thank you so much, WNB. I did want to say my teammates are the ones who really helped me understand this quite a bit. Adam Lassick is actually helping out with different contributions to Hanami itself, and Andy and Jim and Miguel are amazing teammates. I have a ton of links for you all. I will be sure to share this out. Hanami has some really great guides, as well as the documentation itself is where I got the majority of my information at. Also, I have a design guide, because design matters. And that's me.